Hey guys, Gassy TV here with a bit of a special video as I'm going to cover the experiences I've had playing Diablo 4 Vessel of Hatred Season 6 launch, as well as my expectations leading into the Path of Exile 2 early access coming out in November 15th. I'm very excited for this as well. So let's tackle some topics of what my experiences are and comparing them to my expectations for the other game. Let's just crack into it, starting with Diablo 4. The game has gone from a disastrous launch filled with more bugs than not and a very stale and shallow itemization as well as endgame, or rather lack thereof. Now there are plenty of other issues, but those two are the ones that have stood out the most during the early days of Diablo 4. Now as the game has kept releasing new seasons in which they are desperately tried to solve the underlying core problems with the game, it wasn't until Season of Loot Reborn that they took a major step in the right direction, and starting to rebuild some of the confidence and goodwill that they've lost in the community. Now, this was the first season that I personally considered the game moving away from the meme of D4 bad, D4 dog shit into what I would refer to as D4 mid. Sadly, the vast amount of bugs and exploits were still running rampant, but the gameplay loop and general enjoyability of the game has gotten a significant boost now in Season 6 as well as the expansion, in my opinion. Now, I went from playing about a week of the game to find myself in getting about 2 weeks of enjoyment before quitting nowadays. Now, it is important here to point out that the game caters to a very different player base than what I belong to, and that's perfectly fine. Now, if I can get 2 weeks of enjoyment, I do consider that to be a pretty good state for me personally. Fast forward to Vessel of Hatred Season 6, the endgame content as well as some minor adjustments to the itemization made those two specific parts of the game very enjoyable. Now, it was simply a great display of what Blizzard actually can do when they do something right, and that was a very good confidence builder from my experience playing the review access before the launch. Now, I was personally extremely excited for the launch, and as expected, both endgame variety and itemization finally felt, I would dare say the word great. But the expansion story writing was not to the liking of the community. Now, I personally don't care much for lore in ARPGs in general, and genuinely found myself actually enjoying the expansion campaign to be more enjoyable to play through than the first one, despite the story itself feeling, I guess I would say, cringe at times. Exploits such as duping or TOS breaking RM tiers are still running rampant throughout the seasons, and this is still not fixed, completely destroying whatever it is people call the market, if you will. Now, personally, I sold a 4 greater affix item for 10 billion gold on the second day, and obviously I'm 99% certain that the guy who bought it swiped his way to afford it. And not many days after, basically any half-decent item had a starting price of multiple billions of gold. Again, that's billion with a B. And that's just absolutely obnoxious in my opinion. You don't farm that much gold. It just doesn't work that way, and it just felt really awkward that early on. Now, the vast amount of bugs that seems to have dictated the entirety of balance in previous seasons followed the progression into the expansion. The new Spiritborn class, for example, despite bringing what I'd consider the most well-designed class in the game, had fundamental bugs that has been abused to the skies, where you're able to do hundreds upon trillions of damage per hit. Now, this is after the stat squish they did to prevent these insane numbers to begin with, which I was very, very happy with, until we experience these bugged abuse states. Now, these bugs that literally dictate the strength of your builds exist on other classes as well. However, comparing the new shiny class that was just released to literally any of the other classes made them pale in comparison. Specific materials were completely off in terms of drop rates, causing a lot of frustration till they adjusted it. Hell, even Elon Musk, who's become sort of an avid Diablo 4 player at this point, tweeted out that one of his exploits on how to get the most obdusite, which obviously made things worse, as that is an exploit that was now very, very widely marketed to the entire player base. At the time of me recording this video, that specific exploit is still not fixed. Now, speaking of Elon Musk, I do find it kind of crazy to see him game out hard and push aspirational content, such as pit levels above 100 in Diablo 4, to the very next day literally catching a rocket. Now, another cool thing to mention here is that Elon has actually stated in one of his tweets that he will come and try Path of Exile 2 when it launches. Now, are the exploits ruining Diablo 4? And sure, that might seem like a pretty easy question to answer, and obviously the answer is yes. Yes, they are ruining the game. Is it destroying the enjoyability you could get out of it? To some degree, I would say yes. I still find myself enjoying the game between 1 and 2 weeks. I find it fine. However, I do wish that these things would not be the core base of the actual game. I wish that things wouldn't be super exploitable or super abused to the point where build diversity mattered, or to the point where you could play the game and actually enjoy your progression and not feel like your class is completely, well, let's say useless compared to the new shiny toy we got from the expansion, which is just miles ahead of everyone else. Yeah, I think I would enjoy the game a lot more if it wasn't for these bugs and exploits. So that's where I'm at. I just wish they would actually fix these things. On the other hand, they had bigger issues than these, which is kind of crazy to say that they have attended to and gotten to a really good point. So we'll see what they do in the future with future releases and future seasons coming into the game. Maybe and hopefully these things will actually get diminished or lessened to the point where we actually will have a great game. Because I can only stretch so far and say the D4 is good at this point, which is a remarkable step upwards compared to the initial launch of the game. It's always hard to compare games, though, even with the same genre. However, it's even harder still when I'm asked to compare it to Path of Exile 2, which I've only played a bit during playtest, and the game itself is just now on November 15th getting into an early access state for all to enjoy. So with that pretext, I will say this. PoE 2 has seemingly taken everything that, for me personally, makes Diablo 4 really good and implemented them in the world of PoE. Graphics taking a huge leap from the PoE 1 iteration, putting that modernized touch to the game, and GGG has so far managed to keep the essence of Path of Exile whilst making the game considerably more accessible for new and newer players alike to get into. Now, one of the playtests in LA I was invited to go to, I brought a friend of mine who has never played a PoE game before, and only finished 2 games in total in his entire life. Now, those games being Half-Life 2 and Diablo 1. So needless to say, we can all agree that with the history that he has, and him barely touching any game at all in many, many years, he would be considered a non-gamer. Now, this was my main goal when I brought him with me to this event. We sat down in a couch co-op to test Path of Exile 2. And I only helped him when he asked me to. And to my surprise, he had a very easy time understanding and learning what to do with minimal guidance from my end. And that to me set the tone for how effective PoE 2 is handling the new player acquisition to make new players feel like they can understand it without getting this brick wall of tons of complex mechanics shoved in their face, which is what's currently happening in PoE 1. So we'll see how that goes, but I was very excited to experience that. So essentially, PoE 2 is the new player-friendly version of PoE 1. And they managed to do it by focusing on the UI design to communicate information to the player. Now, a simple yet effective example is how a player can, when choosing a skill, there's a little snippet of a video showing in-game how that ability will look like in action. And this extends to support gems utilized for the class, or skill where the initial UI window will actually display recommended support gems for the player, and now this can be bypassed manually if one wants to deviate from this, as more veteran or experienced players might want to do. But the important part to pick out from this is how the UI is communicating it in a quick and easy, but most importantly, a digestible way for even the newest players to the game to understand and actually grasp. Besides graphics, they've made PoE 2 extremely reactive, unlike PoE 2, which is entirely proactively played by having buffs and flasks active before you even get to your enemies or even see them on your screen. In PoE 2, you will have a very different experience playing the game. The idea here is to make the flow of combat and your environment decide your next move. So instead of holding down that one button, we get more of an active fighting experience in which we either set up for combination of moves for optimized efficiency, or to switch mid-combo to adapt to potential threats during combat, such as your evade rolls and whatnot. And I feel like this is what Diablo 4 tried to achieve, but didn't really hit the mark to this extent. And obviously, most of us kind of want to get to the point where we're just not using build or spender strategies. We're just holding down one button. And obviously, from what we've been hearing from Jonathan, is that we are surely going to be seeing that kind of builds being playable in PoE 2 as well. We'll see how that goes once the game actually launches. Now, obviously, this will not be for everyone's liking. Though I, for one, am more than excited for this new game to add to the cycle content ARPGs are going through, so I can just add that to my list of ARPGs I play on every season, league, or cycle launch, whatever you want to call it. Build diversity comes natural for Path of Exile with a significant skill tree and vast options of skills and support gems to alter the way you wish to play your character, which is very different from how Diablo 4 operates. Now, it'll be very interesting to see how the more casual player base that Diablo has tunnel vision focused on will react and experience when they try out Path of Exile 2. On the other hand, GGG has not had a flawless history over the decade plus of content of releases not containing extreme bugs or exploits. However, they've been rare and far between, and with a history of content, they've built up a large amount of goodwill in the community, which I think is the main difference between Path of Exile and Diablo as of right now. Looking back at the Diablo 4 expansion launch that got delayed, I think we can all agree that delays and technical issues happen, and it really sucks when they do. But without having goodwill built up in the community, every single release will be under the microscope, and things that otherwise would have been forgotten and scuffed in under the comment of shit happens instead becomes yet another factor fueling the negative experience the player has. Obviously, it didn't help that the launch of D4 was set to hit on October 8th for most countries. This resulted in them choosing to have a launch at 1 a.m. on a midweek day for European player bases, who then did not get access at 1 a.m. Instead, we got access in the early morning. Now, this is a bit sad to see because, shit happens, right? But because of the lack of goodwill that D4 is currently in, things that were good during these bad times were completely disregarded. For example, Adam Fletcher did a fantastic job with communicating and telegraphing everything that was happening. Slightest little change and update to this specific delay was clearly communicated to the Diablo partners who dished it out to the streamers, but they also updated a blue post for the entire world to see. So there was a consistent flow of communication of what was going on behind the scenes. And we don't really see that type of level of dedicated, clear communication on that level. We see it in many other games, of course, but not to this extent. It was over and beyond, and big props to Adam Fletcher for this, but he didn't get a single credit for this. And this is, again, as a result of the game lacking goodwill in the community, and because of that, everything's under the microscope, and the slightest little hiccup, and they get all that negativity just shoved down again. So hopefully, I think they have set up their game to the point where they are working towards getting this game to a good state, or a great state, because I think it's in a pretty good state right now myself. But what they lack the most is that goodwill in the community, and that's going to take some time to build up, because it takes much less time to completely burn something to the ground than it takes to build it back up. And this sums up my current thoughts surrounding both Diablo 4 and PoE 2 in the current state of both games. And I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on both games in the comments, so let's just hear them. I'll read through the comments myself afterwards. And I will say this to finalize this ranty video, if you will. Now, Diablo 4 is clearly on a good path to redemption, and that's my personal opinion, but they're not quite there yet, but well on their way. Bugs, exploits, and general balance as a result of those two things seems to be the main culprit from my experience that needs attention. The multiplayer content, such as the Dark Citadel, is actually a really crazy cool mechanic for endgame content, which I hope they plan on expanding in the future content releases. By the way, for November 15th PoE 2 Early Access, I am going to be running an uncapped subathon with some crazy stuff happening, and we're going to be prepping this up, and I do have a little surprise guest as well that's going to be making an appearance on the stream. So make sure you stay tuned for that. It's going to be a really, really interesting ride. We'll see how that goes. But make sure you hit that like button, subscribe for more content if you enjoy this type of content, to catch some more, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Till then, as always, stay safe and keep rocking.